This is your employee session for the Drug-Free Workplace Program. In Ohio, we call it the Drug-Free Safety Program, because honestly, that's really where for the emphasis for this is. It's on safety. We want to make sure that everybody's getting home in one piece at the end of the day. It's been my experience that most people don't live to work. We work for a living. We want to go in and do our jobs, make our money, and get back to our lives. That's what we want for you too. And unfortunately, the data supports that a disproportionate number of the catastrophic workplace injuries that occur that result in a fatality or in a hospitalization or in an amputation are caused by individuals who in post-accident substance testing are proven to have either a blood alcohol level of 0.08 or higher, or are proven to have prohibited levels of other drugs of abuse in their system at the time of the accident. And so according to OSHA and the Department of Labor, those add up to about 23% of those catastrophic events are determined to have been preventable because they were caused by, by somebody who was impaired. If we can have these effective programs in place, it diminishes the risk of those types of events occurring. And again, it makes it that much more likely that you'll get home without getting hurt on the job. And so if we can do those things, this is a really effective way to help you do that. There's two main reasons why companies do this. The first is for safety, as I mentioned. The other is for regulatory concerns. There's often language in some contracts when your company's bidding on them that requires the provider of those services to be in compliance with their state's drug-free workplace laws. And with those contracts, that's often a primary eligibility requirement. And so if you are not in good standing with that database, if you're not listed there, it doesn't matter if you've got the best products out there, if you've got the best workers, the best reputation, if you're the lowest bidder, those contracts will often go to a competitor. And if that happens too often, if those big checks stop coming in, big checks can stop going out. And it can have a lot more of an impact on people's lives than what you may consider. So again, it's not top of mind for most people. That's not the main reason why we do this. Safety obviously is, but it is an important thing, and I think it was worthwhile mentioning. In order to maintain that good standing in that database, in order to be considered a truly drug-free workplace, there's 5 components that have to be present. The first is a written policy. That written policy has 2 essential elements to it. It's got certain mandatory protections that have to be in place for employers, meaning that the policy applies fairly to everyone in the workplace. If you're an employee of the company, the policy is the policy is the policy, and it applies to everybody the same way. So similar situations should be handled in a similar manner with similar outcomes. Now, in addition to those due process protections, there's also privacy protections. There are some elements of this program that may result in the provision of medical services in the form of substance testing, post-accident evaluations, and counseling and rehabilitative services. All of those are considered to be medical services. And so they would have those same HIPAA privacy protections attached where your records couldn't be released. They have to be kept under lock and key. They couldn't be released to anybody without your explicit written permission to do so. All right, and those are all spelled out explicitly in that policy along with a whole bunch of other stuff. Now, beyond those protections, there's also certain responsibilities. And the most basic of those is our responsibility to be fit for duty when we're on the job. And fitness for duty has 2 essential elements to it. It requires us to be both sufficiently mentally alert and physically capable of safely performing our job responsibilities. Lots of things can cause a person not to be fit for duty. It could be fatigue, injury, illness, an adverse reaction to medication, substance misuse, emotional distress. I mean, really too many things to name. But I think what all of us can agree on is that if a person is not safe to be on the job, they shouldn't be on the job. Fair enough? So if you notice that there's something going on with you if you can tell that something's wrong, something just isn't right, you're in trouble. Or if you notice that a colleague is struggling with cognitive or psychomotor impairment, then please bring that to the attention of somebody who can get them help. In the overwhelming majority of cases, if a person is showing that kind of impairment in the workplace, it's not because they're under the influence of booze or some other substance. It's generally because they're experiencing some profound medical emergency. And the urgency with which we get that person help, the urgency with which we provide care for that individual is often very determinative to the outcome of that event, whether it's favorable or whether something really bad, something, in some cases, tragic happens. Beyond the policy, there's annual employee education, which we're doing now, annual supervisory education, which we'll be doing later on this morning. There's workplace drug testing, number of different times you might get tested, number of different substances you may be tested for. Now, all of you, I'm sure, were tested pre-employment to make sure that, before you got hired on, that you were, not showing showing positive for any drugs of abuse or ethyl alcohol at the time of hire. There's also other times when you're going to be tested. Probably the most likely, unfortunately, is for a post-accident test. And in Ohio, we have statutes on the books called the rebuttable presumption statutes that require a worker who is injured on the job, if you are injured badly enough that you require off-site medical attention, if you have to go to a hospital, if you have to go to a stat care, even if it's just for a couple of stitches or an x-ray or just an exam because you got banged up pretty badly and you want to make sure you're okay. At the time that post-accident treatment is rendered by a medical professional, you're expected to undergo post-accident substance testing as well. That's not your company being mean. That's not insurance provider trying to get out of something. It's state law. And there are some ramifications for that. Because if at that time that services are rendered, you aren't tested, and then later on that injury turns into a workers' compensation claim, then that claim can be denied based on the fact that you weren't tested under that law. Because in the eyes of the state, it looks like that you avoided the test deliberately. Even if you asked for it, even if you begged for it, they just didn't have anybody available to test you. They're going to assume that you avoided it, and they can disallow it. And then the one time when you're using the insurance that you hope to God you would never have to use, the one time that you need it, it wouldn't be there for you. Beyond that, another little understood provision of this is that when there's an accident, maybe it's at the end of the day, or maybe you're injured and you're sent home after you're treated. Do not consume any alcohol until you're tested for alcohol, or until that alcohol testing is done with an evidential breath test, or whole blood is drawn, which is a rare thing, or until 8 hours elapses. Either way, because if you get off of work because you got banged up and you go home and in order to take the edge out of things, you make yourself a cocktail or you have a couple of beers or whatever, then you get a phone call that says, hey, they didn't test you, you need to go. The testing facility isn't going to be able to tell when you had that alcohol entered into your system. And so you could get into, they could deduce that you had alcohol in your system at the time of the accident. You get in trouble for something that you shouldn't get in trouble for. So I wanted to make sure that you were aware of that so you didn't run into that. I know those are kind of rare pitfalls, but those are sometimes the things that come back to bite us. If not, then the other times you make tested for reasonable suspicion. Again, I said that let you know the expectation is you got to be fit for duty. If you're showing obvious indicators of cognitive or psychomotor impairment, and it's brought to the attention of your supervisor, you may get tapped on the shoulder, called aside, and they're doing this for your own good. Please keep in mind this is not something that's being done to you; it's something that's being done for you, so that you don't get hurt or so you don't hurt somebody else. They're not making an allegation that you're under the influence of alcohol or any other drug. There's no allegation or accusation. There has to be testing there to rule that out so that they can get to the real cause if it's something else. I would encourage you, if you are pulled aside and sent for that kind of test or taken that kind of test, that you don't take it personal, don't overreact. It's not a personal affront to you. This is just something that's being done to maintain the safety of the workplace, and I hope that you can understand it, just go along with it. If there's not, if nothing there, there's nothing there, and there's no reason getting bent out of shape over it. Just go along with the process and let it play out. Beyond that, if your company does offer a second chance for employees who come forward voluntarily and seek help with a substance use issue. So if of your own accord, you recognize that you're having a problem with, you're drinking more than you're comfortable with, or you've been taking some prescription medication, you tried to stop, recognize it's a lot harder than you thought it would be, or you got involved in some other things and you know that it's problematic and you want to stop. If you talk to management, you let them know. Then you can ask for leave, that you can go and get the help that you need to address that issue, and your job will be secure for you. It's really a win-win both for you and for the employer. We want to make sure that you understand that it is available. One of the reasons that becomes a barrier sometimes to people asking for help is the fear that if it's known that they need help, that they'll get in trouble or lose their job. And so this is kind of an outlet valve where if you need the help, you can ask for it. You're given some grace. You're given the opportunity to get back on track and get the support that you need. If you need that, it's really important that you take advantage of it, because not every place, I can tell you, offers that. Beyond that, before you return to work, though, you're going to have a clean return to duty drug screen to show that you are, in fact, holding up your end of the deal, and before you come back to work, that you do not have any prohibited substances in your system at that time. And then there'll be several follow-up tests after that to give you some extra accountability to help you stay on track. It's easy if there's not that extra support or accountability sometimes to backslide, sometimes to cut yourself some breaks. Think about if you've ever tried to make a behavioral change, tried to diet, you had a New Year's resolution where you're going to get in tremendous shape and keep all that, keep that extra weight off, and then you see the cold pizza in the fridge, the next day you have one slice, and it's easy to slip right back into old behaviors. If you have that extra accountability, if you've got that extra support, it can make it a little easier, and there's a method to the madness with that, right? There's also can be different job classifications that have random testing as well, and so any of those may apply. It's important that you, bottom line, just know that the testing that's being done is being done as a deterrent to discourage folks from coming into work with prohibited substances in their system that may put them or other people in danger. It's something, again, that's being done for you, not being done to you. Now, there's a number of different substances you're going to be tested for. They'll test you for the various stimulants, the amphetamines, cocaine, including methamphetamine. Test for marijuana, for MDMA, for the opiates, including metabolites for heroin. They also test for PCP or phencyclidine angel dust. And a lot of companies are expanding their testing panel to include quite a few other substances also. Very commonly, they test for benzodiazepines, for barbiturates, for some of the medication-assisted therapies like methadone, that even though they're being used as a harm reduction as an opioid replacement therapy, they often cause impairment in people too, and so if they're taken, depending on their dosage, that's something that employers want to know about. So the first ones that I mentioned are more of a floor than a ceiling. They can test for more things, and that's often explained in your policy as well. But bottom line, they can test for anything that's been approved by the Department of Health and Human Services in accordance with their guidelines. Now, in addition to the policy, the training, the testing, the last element of this is Employee Assistance Program counseling and rehabilitative services. These are confidential, affordable, accessible counseling and rehabilitative services that are made available to employees of employers who have these programs in place. And how many of you are aware that you have access to EAP services as a benefit of working here? Okay. If you don't know, you do. These are services that are provided by clinicians and therapists and providers that have no affiliation with your company. These are not agents of your company. These are providers who are contracted to benefit the workers of your company. But what goes on there stays there and has the same HIPAA protections as if you're talking to your doctor or talking to an attorney or whatever. What's said behind those four walls stays there. And so you don't have to worry about what you discuss trickling back to your employer or anybody else. I know it's a barrier for some folks to utilize those services. It's important to understand that. It's one place where you can go and lay out what's really going on in your lives. And a lot of times people have issues that are going on that are significantly diminishing their quality of life. They've got stuff that's going on that is interfering with their primary relationships in their life, with their significant other, with their kids, with their families, with their neighbors, with their community, interfering with their physical well-being, with their financial stability, interfering with sometimes jeopardizing their freedom. They've got big issues that sometimes feel overwhelming, and sometimes those issues feel so big they just don't know where to get started. Making an EAP appointment and keeping it, and going in and just laying the cards out on the table and talking to that professional, those folks are often very well-seasoned therapists and clinicians who've seen a lot of stuff for a long time. And there's often very few new problems under the sun. They've likely seen problems similar to yours. They've seen solutions that work. They often make suggestions that you choose what you think might work, and then go try it on. And it gives you a place, if nothing else, to get some focus, to get kind of a launching pad to get started. And it can be incredibly healing, incredibly cathartic, incredibly valuable. I can tell you that I've utilized these services on numerous occasions personally, and to great effect. I encourage you, if you're struggling, if you need help, to take a look at it, check them out. If you need the services, you take advantage of that and that you find the same value in it that I have. Go ahead and jump into a couple of these topics. The first one that I wanted to cover with you is I'm getting a lot of questions about cannabis. What's going on with weed? And everywhere I go, that's something that comes up. And there are a couple pitfalls that I'm seeing employees fall into that I hope I can provide some information for you that can help you to avoid those problems from developing. First off, I know there was some confusing headlines in the news, last fall, where a lot of people, got some mixed signals about what might be going on at the federal level about reclassifying marijuana, all that. I'll tell you what, anybody who can prognosticate what the federal government's going to do by reading the tea leaves is a lot smarter. As somebody who's immersed in this on a daily basis, I can't tell you what they're going to do any more than anybody else. What I can tell you is that the funny thing about change is that until it actually happens, things stay the same. And right now, the way things stand is that in the eyes of the federal government, marijuana is viewed as a Schedule I controlled substance. That means in the eyes of the federal government, marijuana is technically more dangerous from their perspective than drugs like fentanyl and PCP and cocaine, which are actually Schedule II drugs. And so that Schedule I classification has some real life ramifications. It means that in the eyes of the federal government, marijuana is considered to be a dangerous drug with a high potential for abuse and no FDA-approved medical use. That means that doctors cannot prescribe it. Even though there are 37 medical marijuana states, even though there's 21 states that have recreational marijuana laws that are passed, even though Ohio is likely on track to do that this November. Again, I can't see the future, but if you're reading the tea leaf, that's how it's looking. Even though there are 38 states that sell those horrible Delta 8 and Delta 10 products over the counter at gas stations, convenience stores, I'll talk about that in a second. It's still one of the substances that's tested for in the workplace, and you can't have THC in your system on the job. And so we're having a lot of folks who are testing positive for those residual metabolites of THC, which linger in your system for a really long time after a person uses any of these cannabis products. And so I want to go over a couple of those things with you so you understand that even though you may not be doing anything intentionally, you may inadvertently do something that could put you at risk of violating your workplace policy. What that means for us in the workplace is because many of the safety regulations which govern safety-sensitive jobs like construction, manufacturing, oil and gas, transportation, because the safety regulations in the workplace are federally mandated by OSHA regs, Department of Transportation regs, Department of Labor regulations, the Drug-Free Workplace Act, et cetera, then it means that in a drug-free workplace that you still can't have marijuana in your system on the job, marijuana metabolites, even if you're living in a medical marijuana state, like 37 of our states, or a recreational marijuana state, like 21 of our states, or 38 of the states, including Ohio, that allow for the sale of over-the-counter of the Delta 8 or Delta 10 THC products. You still can't have THC metabolites in your system on the job. And so I want to go over a couple of bugaboos, a couple of pitfalls that we're seeing people step into that are causing a lot of disruptions to their lives and are causing some real headaches for employers. And I think it's, that most people understand, hey, if I'm working in a drug-free workplace, I can't smoke weed. And that's a good practice, and I'd say keep not doing that, keep not smoking weed. But the question I get a lot is, what about these Delta 8 and Delta 10 products? I mean, they're legal. They're being sold in gas stations, convenience shops, convenience stores, head shops, smoke shops, vape shops, truck stops. I mean, these things are being sold all over the place, these Delta 8, Delta 10 THC products that are derived from hemp. And they're being sold in a very misleading way. They're being sold in these places often explicitly telling customers that this is some kind of magical end around their drug-free workplace policy. And I'm here to tell you the research does not bear that out. The research bears out that our bodies cannot differentiate between delta 8, delta 9, and delta 10 THC. When our body breaks it down into the same metabolites, including the specific carboxy-THC metabolite that is tested for with immunoassay urine testing. This is a compound that stores in our fat cells and stays there for a long time after a person uses. And so if you're using those products, I encourage you to stop doing so, because they are not some get-out-of-jail-free card where you can get high and still avoid testing positive at work. That if you are using those products, you get tested, your body can't tell the difference, the THC is still going to show up, and a positive test is a positive test is a positive test, it's still going to be a violation. The other question that I get asked really frequently is, what about CBDs? I mean, CBDs are pretty harmless, aren't they? I mean, I get this question all the time, often by folks who have been directed by their physicians and by their loved ones, in some cases by their employers, to use these CBDs because they have a reputation as being relatively harmless and benign, in some cases even beneficial. A lot of it, I believe, is kind of a placebo effect, or a kind of wishful thinking themselves into feeling better, but that works too. So when people ask me, what if I'm taking CBDs, do I have to worry about failing a drug test? It's a tricky question, because frankly, the literal answer to that would be, yes, you could use those without failing a drug screen if it were only pure CBD. If it was pure cannabidiol, isolated without any other plant components from the cannabis plant, you really wouldn't have anything to worry about, because urinalysis testing that we do doesn't even test for CBD. It tests for the THC metabolite, not cannabidiol. Here's where the rub comes in. The oils that are on the shelves in these health food stores and that people buy online and that they get at flea markets or from the next door neighbors a lot of times are not pure CBD oil. The oils that are being sold as often as CBD oils would much more accurately be labeled as hemp oils, because what those oils consist of is the hemp plants being emulsified and then the essential oils being extracted from those emulsified plants. And so when they extract those essential oils, they're getting oils of all of the constituent compounds from that plant, including THC. In 2018, President Trump signed the Farm Bill of 2018, which allowed farmers to grow hemp that contained up to 0.3% THC. Huge win for farmers, big boon for the agricultural industry. But it allowed for those hemp plants to legally contain at least 0.3%, or no more than 0.3% THC by volume. Those oils that are sold as CBD oils are often concentrated oils that have much higher concentrations of THC in them than that 0.03%. And I just went through my federal recertification for this. We spent a whole day on cannabis. And one of the things they asked me to share when I'm doing these classes is to let people know, when it comes to CBD, remember though, even though CBD technically stands for cannabidiol, remember that CBD can be detected. So, if you're working in a safety-sensitive job that does test for the presence of THC, it may behoove you to look for relief in some other medication, or until better guidance is provided on the use of these products moving forward in the near future. But right now, taking those chances is it puts you in a situation where it can be embarrassing. It can make you unavailable to the company when they need you the most, and it can put you in a position where it can put your job in jeopardy, or at least put you on a shelf where you can't you can't earn and provide for them, for your families, for your loved ones the way that you need to. It's an avoidable problem. I wanted to make sure I went over that with you so you avoided that pitfall. Two quick things I want to touch on before we wrap things up. Right now we're in our streets are getting flooded with really incredibly potent, deadly synthetic opioids. Particularly the fentanyl analogs, the fluorofentanyl, parafluorofentanyl, carfentanyl. I mean, fentanyl itself is already about 100 times more powerful than morphine. And these analogs are 50, 80, 100 times more potent than fentanyl itself. So you're looking at these compounds that are 5, 8, 10,000 times more powerful than morphine. And they're being mixed with these experimental painkillers called nitazines and nitazine analogs that are incredibly potent as well. Those were so dangerous that the FDA never approved them for use on human beings, even though that was their original intention. And when they mix these things together, each one makes the other one more dangerous. Each one makes the other one more potent. It's an effect called potentiation. Each one increases the potency of the other. So like 2 times 2 doesn't equal 4. 2 times 2 equals like 10. And so you've got these incredibly potent synthetic opioids that are being mixed into these pastes, that are being mixed into these fentanyl pills that are just flooding our streets. And right now there's an overdose alert warning for Stark County, Summit County, Medina County, Mahoning County, and largely because of these M30s, these blue M30 pills. They're calling them Perk 30s that are on the streets. The dealers are trying to pass these off as legitimate FDA-approved, like oxycodone tablets. Nothing could be further from the truth. If they were actually oxycodone, they would go for about $75 to $90 a piece. These things are being sold for $20, $25 a piece in the black market. If it's too good to be true, it probably is. And there's a lot of people that are dying from. They've actually added a new terminology in my field that they're referring now to opioid overdoses as opioid poisonings, because so many people are inadvertently taking things that they think are one thing, often something that's harmless or benign, and it's causing them their system to be overwhelmed, and they experience an overdose, stop breathing, and a lot of times have something really bad happen. The emoji chart that I handed out to you was from the DEA. It's something that I'd like for you to take with you and check it out on your own time. But this is an emoji chart that kids are using to use social media apps like Snapchat, Instagram, and other apps that are designed for their secrecy and encryption to be able to order illicit drugs. And there's a really good tutorial for. I know that a lot of us, if you've got a problem, if you're worried about your kids at home, if you're worried about what's going on in your household, it's hard to sometimes focus on what's going on at work. And so if you're worried about keeping them safe, there's a great tool that I wanted to bring to your attention. It's a website called smartsocial.com. They've got a tutorial for parents to help explain the process by which kids are obtaining these things. It's not just kids, by the way. It's adults too. But they at least, they know the risks. They know what they're getting into. A lot of times the kids are naive and they don't. It goes through not only how the process is being exploited by criminals, but more importantly, what tools parents can use to put parental controls in place, to put blocks there, to monitor their kids' social media use, so that they don't fall victim to the predators that are out there that would do them harm. There's so many kids that are buying. You may see the stories on in the news. They think they're getting one thing on online. They end up getting these fentanyl pills, and with really just horrible outcomes. So take a look at it. One thing I'd ask you to pass along to your families is not to tell your kids not to take anything from anybody if they don't understand the chain of custody. If it's not coming from you or from your spouse, or you or from their other parent. If it's not coming from their from the nurse or from the doctor, and say don't take it, because there's so much bad stuff out there right now. I'm hearing horror stories left and right. The last thing I want to talk to you about is coming out of the pandemic. There's still this ongoing mental health crisis in the United States that's only gotten worse. Going into the pandemic, we were already facing all kinds of depression and anxiety and burnout and stress and myriad other mental health maladies. And coming out of it, things have only gotten worse. They've only been exacerbated. I just read a study recently that talked about the adult population of the United States being the most in debt, obese, over-medicated, and addicted cohort of adults in world history. And that is both a symptom and a cause of untreated mental health issues. And what that leads to is, as folks are feeling that acute emotional pain, they're often looking for a way to feel better, so they turn to drinking more alcohol, to popping more pills, to taking more drugs. That often exacerbates spending more money, eating more food, doing whatever they can, do whatever escape behavior they find that brings them pleasure. Then that often contributes to their emotional decline. It often leads to them becoming so hopeless and despondent. Unfortunately, they often feel trapped and sometimes engage in really drastic, tragic behavior. And we're seeing a spike in suicides across the country too. So what I wanted to spend a moment doing with you is to talk to you about the role that you can play to try to prevent some of these tragedies, what you can do to look out for each other. Keeping in mind that most of us spend more of our waking hours with the people that we work with than with the people we live with. In order to make a difference, you don't have to have a bunch of fancy alphabet soup behind your name. You don't have to be a psychiatrist. You don't have to be a member of the clergy or a social worker or an EMT. All you have to be is a human being who cares about other human beings. And so if you're willing to get out of your own head a little bit, if you're willing to pay attention to others, and if you notice that somebody seems to be really struggling, if you notice that they've had some really drastic, significant changes that have taken place, somebody who used to be kind of outgoing and friendly, all of a sudden is very withdrawn or hostile or agitated. Somebody who's experiencing sudden, rapid weight loss. Somebody whose appearance has changed significantly, where they used to always be pretty well kept together, all of a sudden they look disheveled and unkept. They're not taking good care of themselves. Someone who's complaining about not being able to sleep or having perpetual insomnia. Folks who are, if you know that they're going through particularly traumatic life events, like a divorce or the death of a loved one, God forbid, death of a child, or going through financial devastation, looking at bankruptcy or foreclosure or potential homelessness, after spending all the time building up that nest egg. Looking at serious criminal charges or legal actions that could have real serious consequences. A lot of times when folks are feeling that boxed in that way, it can really impact the way that they're interacting with others and how they're interacting with the world. You may notice that at work that their job performance changes significantly, that they used to be somebody you could always count on to be there consistently, and now all of a sudden they're missing a lot, or they're not showing up on time, that they're not, you can't count on them to do what they say they're going to do, or to do their job responsibly or safely. If you're noticing those things and you're concerned about the person, then there's a way to have this conversation that where you can get some good information and you can actually be helpful to that person. And it starts off with doing a status check. A status check just means asking the person how they are. It doesn't have to be some fancy thing where you've got an assessment tool and a clipboard or anything. You just ask them how they are. Hey man, how you doing? You okay? And then listen to what they say. And for goodness sake, when you talk to them, put your phone away. Don't divide your attention. Give them your full attention. There's no faster way to lose a person's engagement than to act like you're not giving them their full attention. Even if the person was inclined to talk to you, if you're asking them questions but looking at your phone and doing something else, they're going to shut down anyway. So put your phone away for a minute, talk to them, ask them, how you doing, and then listen. And if they let you know that they're struggling, if they say something like, man, I tell you, it just keeps getting worse and worse. I can't catch a break. It's not one thing, it's another. It's always, I feel like, you know, the walls are closed in, I feel trapped, you know, I don't know what I'm going to do. You know, if this is life, I don't know if it's worth going on, you know, things like that. Those are all very alarming statements. And if someone responds in that way, it's important that we don't just brush it off, that we don't just take it for granted or you know, assume that they are just venting or don't mean it. A lot of times we'll do that because our inclination towards denial. We don't want to believe that another human being is hurting that way, and so we try to convince ourselves that maybe they aren't. But sometimes they really are. And so it's important that you know, if the person shares those things, that the appropriate way to respond is quite simply just to say, man, I'm sorry to hear you're struggling that way. I didn't know. That sucks. And I'll tell you what, those two words, that sucks, can go, I mean, those are worth their weight in gold. They can go a really long way, particularly those of you who are in relationships. Sometimes the person you're talking to doesn't want to know what you would have done differently or how you would have done it better or you know, or how you wish it was you because you would have done thus and such, or how at least it wasn't this other horrible thing. Sometimes they just want to hear, man, that sucks. And I'll tell you what, use that in your interactions, and I promise you, you'll have a lot better results than you probably even imagined. But beyond that, then, if you listen to them and the things that they're saying are making you concerned that they may be at risk of self-harm, then asking them, you can ask them if they are, but there's a way to get there. And you can go from, wow, that sucks, I'm sorry to hear that you're struggling that way, but I don't want to overstep, but I got to tell you, some of the things that you're saying have me a little bit concerned. I was wondering, are you thinking about self-harm? Are you thinking about suicide? Now, I know a lot of people would never, ever could never see themselves having this conversation. Would say, you know, that's far-fetched, I'd never be there. But you know what? Never say never. If you ask, you'd be surprised what people will tell you. And even if you're not particularly close to the person, sometimes that works in your favor. If you've ever been standing in line at a grocery store or sitting next to somebody on a plane or on a bus or at a lunch counter, and they just, you know, some stranger just opens up and spills their guts. I mean, there's a reason for that. Human beings have a tendency to vent to strangers because they don't expect to have to answer for it later on. And so if you don't have a particularly close relationship, that may put you in a position for them to really dish to you. And so, you know, ask them, say, I'm sorry that you're struggling, you know, or, you know, I don't want to overstep, but, you know, are you thinking about it? And a lot of people are reluctant to do that because they're afraid they're going to plant seeds in the person's head, that they're going to put ideas in their head. And the research on this is irrefutable. Asking a person if they're thinking about self-harm or suicide does not make them more likely to go through with those actions. If they're thinking about it, they're already thinking about it. If they're not, they're not. You're not going to be some puppet master that's going to change the way they behave by asking them a question. And then after you ask, listen to them. And if they answer in this one particular way, it's a red flag that you need to pay attention to. If they say, well, sure, you know, but everybody thinks about suicide sometimes, don't they? That's a big red flag. Because honestly, what we tend to do as human beings is globalize our internal dialogue. We tend to assume that if we're thinking about something, everybody else does too, even if nobody else is thinking the same thing. And so if they're thinking about it, if they say, well, everybody does, don't they? What they're really saying is, yes, I think about it sometimes. That's a big flashing warning sign. And so at that point, the follow-up question could be, man, I'm sorry I'm sorry to hear that you're thinking of other things. You know, do you have a plan? Have you thought about like how you would do it, or a time or anything? And again, I know this sounds far-fetched, like questions that a lot of people wouldn't normally ask. But this is a weird situation, and assume that nobody else has had this conversation with the person, because nobody else maybe has. You may be the only person that's getting this information. And if you ask them, they might just tell you. They may say something like, well, yeah, you know what, I have thought about it. I've never wanted to have a gun in my home in my life. But last weekend I went to Fin, Feather, and Fur. I bought a 9mm. It's home in my sock drawer. I figured if I was going to do it, that's probably how I'd do it. I mean, even I couldn't screw that up. And yeah, I thought about when I would do it. I wouldn't want to do it when my kids were home. I wouldn't want them to find me. So I know they're going to their grandparents over spring break. You know, if I was going to do it, that would probably be, you know, a window where I would. Would that be important information for you to have? Absolutely, right? After they've communicated with you that way, it's important that you thank them for sharing with you. They know it couldn't have been easy. Hey, man, I really appreciate you opening up that way. I know it couldn't have been easy. I want you to know that there's a whole bunch of folks, there's a whole bunch of resources that are available. There's a whole lot of people who care, who want to help. And then transition to and make sure that they're made aware of the new 988 Crisis Lifeline. The Department of Health and Human Services has launched this 988 number for folks who are struggling with mental health crises. They've modeled it after 911. If you look outside your window and you see your neighbor's house on fire, 911, fire department's coming, right? Somebody's struggling with a mental health crisis, they can call, they can text, they can chat, 988, anonymously, confidentially, and they can talk to a live mental health professional 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, who's specifically trained in crisis prevention, intervention, and remediation. Somebody who can help not only to talk them off the ledge, but who has access to a database of up-to-date resources in each community where the person can get the help that they need with their specific type of problem without having to try to navigate a bunch of dead ends on the internet that lead nowhere and just going to increase their frustration. And this 988 number is not only for the person who's in crisis, but it can be for any of us who are concerned about somebody who is. Because if we're concerned and we're not sure what to do, we can call 988, ask them to walk us through what to do, and help us to navigate what resources are available so that we can have them listed out and at our fingertips so that when we have that conversation with a person, we can present them with the resources that are available. It's an amazing option, folks. It is gold. And then after you've passed on that 988 number to the individual, make sure that you're letting your supervisor know, making sure that you're letting HR know. And this is not snitching or ratting, this is life or death. They're not going to get in trouble, they're not going to get reprimanded, they're not going to get censured. They're just going to get extra support. Just like if you saw somebody who was clutching their chest and showing signs of a heart attack, who said, you know, please don't say anything to anybody, I just got to get through the day, I need the hours. You still call 911, you still call EMS, you still get them help. It's life and death, it's more important. You make sure you let somebody know so that the company can provide extra support, maybe make a referral for EAP if they're interested, and then follow up with them from time to time afterwards. Stop by their station, give them a call, give them a text. You don't have to take responsibility for them, you don't have to be their best friend, you don't have to break bread every meal, you don't have to have them move in with you. But please keep in mind, when a person is struggling with depression that way, they often feel like nobody cares about them. They feel like the world would be better off without them. All evidence often to the contrary. And if after having that kind of a very personal conversation, you don't follow up with them, they may misinterpret that to mean that you don't care, just like everybody else. If you do follow up, it may reinforce their faith in mankind. Sometimes we live lives of seconds and inches, the smallest things to make the biggest impact. You never know. I can tell you there's always going to be a time when you're going to say, I wish I had or I'm glad I did. Which one do you want to say? I would hope that if you were struggling or someone that you loved were struggling, that somebody would be there to help them. You can be that person for somebody else too. Finally, just on a very personal note, a while back, I lost one of my best friends in the world to suicide. And I tell you, it was devastating then. It's still devastating to this day for me. The way that I grieved that death was to volunteer. I volunteered with the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. I served on the Northeast Ohio's Committee for Community Outreach and Fundraising. And I learned everything I could about the connection between substance abuse and suicide, which is really substantial. I learned everything I could about the connection between untreated depression and suicide. I learned about what can be done to help families heal after there's been a completed suicide. But one thing that really stuck with me was the idea that suicide is often becomes a legacy event in a family. That even if you can look back for generations and can't see a single instance of a suicide death, that once there is a completed suicide in that family, they often tend to happen in clusters in the generations right afterwards. Because what was previously a forbidden taboo suddenly becomes an option to consider. They start thinking, man, maybe it was good enough for grandma or grandpa or mom or dad or aunt or uncle or cousin or brother or sister. Maybe they were onto something. Maybe it's good enough for me. All of us want to leave a legacy to our loved ones. It's not a legacy we want to leave. If you're struggling, if you need help, please know there are a lot of people that want to help. There's a lot of resources available, maybe more now than there ever has been in our lifetime. But it's our responsibility to let other people know that we're struggling, to let people know that we need help. They're not mind readers. Please don't play that peekaboo game or let your pride get in the way. If you're struggling, if you need help, let people know that let somebody know that you need it. Get the help that you need. I want to thank you all for your time and your attention. It wasn't necessarily a bunch of rosy sunshine. Some of these topics are kind of tough, but they're things that we're seeing in our practice. We've had 2 of our partner companies that have suffered losses to suicide deaths just since the last time I was here. And I know they're absolutely devastating to the morale of those employees. And I would hate like heck to have something like that happen here. So, folks, again, thank you very much for your time and attention. Have a great rest of the day. We'll catch you next time.